Hello and welcome to India Reads. My name is Pradeep and we are reading My Early Years by Rabindranath Tagore. We are in chapter number 9 titled My Father. Shortly after my birth, my father took to constantly traveling abroad. So it is no exaggeration to say that in my earlier childhood, I hardly knew him. He would now and then come back all of a sudden, and with him some foreign servants with whom I felt extremely eager to make friends. Once there came in this way a young Punjabi servant named Lenu. The cordiality of the reception he got from us would have been worthy of Ranjit Singh himself. Not only was he a foreigner but a Punjabi to boot, what wonder he stole our hearts away. We had the same reverence for the whole Punjabi nation as for Bhima and Arjuna of the Mahabharata. They were warriors, and if they had sometimes fought and lost, that was clearly the enemy's fault. It was glorious to have Lenu of the Punjab in our very home. My sister-in-law had a model warship under a glass case, which when wound up rocked on blue painted silken waves to the tinkling of a musical box. I would beg hard for the loan of this to display its marvels to the admiring Lenu. Caged in the whole house as we were, anything savouring of foreign parts had a peculiar charm for me. This was one of the reasons I made so much of Lenu. This was also the reason why Gabriel the Jew with his embroidered gabardine, who came to sell attars and scented oils, stirred me so, and the huge Kabulis with their dusty baggy trousers and the knapsacks and bundles wrought on my young mind a fearful fascination. Anyhow, when my father came, he would be content with wandering around his entourage and in the company of servants. We did not reach his immediate presence. Once, while my father was away in the Himalayas, that old bogey of British government, the Russian invasion, came to be a subject of agitated conversation among the people. Some well-meaning lady friend had enlarged upon the impending danger to my mother with all the circumstances of a prolific imagination. How could a body tell from which of the Tibetan passes the Russian host might suddenly flash forth like a baleful comet? My mother was seriously alarmed. Possibly the other members of the family did not share her misgivings. So, despairingly of grown-up sympathy, she sought my boyish support. "Won't you write to your father about the Russians?" she asked. That letter, carrying the tidings of my mother's anxieties, was the first one to my father. I did not know to begin or end a letter or anything at all. I went to Mahananda, the estate munshi. The resulting style of address was doubtless correct enough, but the sentiments could not have escaped the musty flavour inescapable from the literature emanating from an estate officer. I got a reply to my letter. My father asked me not to be afraid. If the Russians came, he would drive them away himself. This confident assurance did not seem to have the effect of relieving my mother's fears, but it served to free me of all timidity towards my father. After all, I wanted to write to him every day, and pestered Mahananda accordingly. Unable to withstand my importunity, he would make out drafts for me to copy. But I did not know that there was a postage to be paid for. I had an idea that letters placed in Mahananda's hands got to their destination without any need for further worry. It is hardly necessary to mention that Mahananda, being considerably older than myself, these letters never reached the Himalayan hilltops. When, after his long absences, my father came home, even for a few days, the whole house seemed to be filled with the weight of his presence. He would see our elders at certain hours, formally robed in their chogas, passing to his rooms with restrained gait and sobered mien, casting away any pan they might have been chewing. Everyone seemed on the alert. To make sure nothing going wrong, my mother would superintend the cooking herself. The old mace bearer Kinu, with his white livery and crested turban, on guard at my father's door, would warn us not to be boisterous at the veranda in front of his rooms during midday siesta. We had to walk past quietly, talking in whispers, and dared not to take a peep inside. On one occasion, my father came to invest the three of us with the sacred thread. With the help of Pandit Vedantavagish, he had collected the old Vedic rites for the purpose. For days together, we were taught to chant in correct accents the selections from the Upanishads arranged by my father under the name of Brahma Dharma, seated in the prayer hall with Becharam Babu. Finally, with shaven heads and gold rings in our ears, we three budding Brahmins went into a 3-day retreat in a portion of the third story. It was great fun. The earrings gave us a good handle to pull each other's ears with. We found a little drum lying in one of the rooms. Taking this, we would stand out in the veranda, and when we caught sight of any servant passing in the story below, we would rap a tattoo on it. This would make the man look up, only to beat a hasty retreat the next moment with averted eyes. In short, we cannot claim that these days of our retirement were passed with ascetic meditation. I am, however, persuaded that boys like ourselves could not have been rare in the hermitages of the old, and if some ancient document has it, the 10 or 12-year-old Saradvata or Sarngarvaha is spending the whole of the days of his boyhood offering oblations and chanting mantras. We are not compelled to put unquestioning faith in the statement, because the book of the boy nature is even older and also more authentic. After we had attained full Brahminhood, I became very keen on repeating the Gayatri. I would meditate on it with great concentration. It is hardly a text, the full meaning of which I could have grasped at that age. I remember what efforts I made to extend the range of my consciousness with the help of the initial invocation of earth, firmament, and heaven. How I felt or thought it is difficult to express clearly, but this much is certain, that to be clear about the meaning of the words is not the most important function of the human understanding. The main object of teaching is not to explain the meanings, but to knock at the door of the mind. If any boy is asked to give an account of what is awakened in him at such knocking, he will probably say something very silly, for what happens within is much bigger than what we can express in words. Those who pin their faith on university examinations as a test of all educational results take no account of this fact. I can recollect many things which I did not understand, but which stirred me deeply. Once, on the roof terrace in our riverside villa, my elder brother, at sudden gathering of the clouds, repeated some stanzas of Kalidasa's Cloud Messenger. I could not, nor had I the need to understand a word of Sanskrit. His ecstatic declamation of the sonorous rhythm was enough for me. Then again, before I could properly understand English, a profusely illustrated edition of the two old curiosity shop fell in my hands. I went through the whole of it, through at least 9/10 of the words were unknown to me. Yet, with the vaguest idea conjured from the rest, I spun out a variously colored thread on which to string the illustrations. Any university examiner would have given me a great big 0, but the reading of this book had not proven for me quite so empty after all. Another time I had accompanied my father on a trip to Ganges in his houseboat. Among the books that he had with him was an old Fort William edition of Jayadeva's Gita Govinda. It was in the Bengali character. The verses were not printed in separate lines but ran on like prose. I did not then know anything of Sanskrit, not because of my knowledge of the Bengali. Many of the words were familiar, but because of my knowledge of Bengali, many of the words were familiar. I cannot tell how often I felt that reading the Gita Govinda, how often I read that Gita Govinda. I well remember this line: the might that was passed on in the lonely forest courage. It spread an atmosphere of vague beauty over my mind. That one Sanskrit word, Nibhitra Nikunja Graham, meaning the lonely forest cottage, was quite enough for me. I had to discover for myself the intricate meter of Jayadeva because its divisions were lost in the clumsy form of prose form of the book, and this discovery gave me great delight. Of course, I did not fully comprehend Jayadeva's meaning. It would hardly be correct to aver that I had got it even partly, but the sound of the words and the lilt of the meter filled my mind with pictures of wonderful beauty, which impelled me to copy out the whole of the book for my own use. The same thing happened when I was little older with the verse of Kalidasa's The Birth of the War God. The verse moved me greatly, though the only words which I gathered the sense were the breeze carrying the spray mist of the falling waters of the sacred Mandakini and the shaking of the deodar leaves. These left me pining to taste the beauties of the whole. When later a Pandit explained to me that in the next two lines, the breeze went on to splitting the feathers of the peacock plume on the head of the eager deer hunter, the thinness of this last conceit disappointed me. I was much better off when I relied upon my imagination to complete the verse. Whoever goes back to the early childhood will agree that his greatest gains were not in the proportion to the completeness of his understanding. Our Kathakas knew this well. So their narratives always have a good proportion of ear-lifting Sanskrit words and abstruse remarks not calculated to be fully understood by simple bearers, but only to be suggestive. So as I was saying, though in that age I could not realize the full meaning of the Gayatri, there was something in me which could do without a complete understanding. I am reminded of a day when I was seated on the cement floor in a corner of our schoolroom, meditating on the text. My eyes overflowed with tears. Why those tears came, I knew not, and to a strict cross-examiner, I would have probably given some explanation having nothing to do with the Gayatri. The fact of the matter was what was going on in the inner recesses of the consciousness is not always known to the dweller on the surface. So with this I'm going to stop because this is an interesting chapter. This chapter is all about Tagore's father and the people that he brought in, the foreign servants that he brought in. Tagore's father did not spend too much time with Tagore after he was born. He would come once in a while and he would bring interesting, exotic foreign servants whom Tagore was ready to impress. One of them being a Punjabi servant Lemu, whom Tagore enjoyed showing the beautiful showpiece of a ship that they had, which when turned around had silken blue waves which would appear. And apart from this, there were other foreign servants which his father would bring, like the Jew who wanted to sell attar, which is perfume, and the Baghdadis who used to come dressed very differently from what Tagore had experienced, and he would fancy them, though he was a bit fearful of them. So these were some of the experiences that are covered in this chapter. Also covered in this chapter are Tagore's consciousness of what was happening around the world, slowly expanding with what he would be hearing around. Obviously, most of it did not affect him, but some of them would affect his mother. For example, the talk about the Russian invasion on the Indian subcontinent, which was obviously then ruled by the British, was a talk that disturbed his mother. And so, on the advice of his mother, or rather on the request of his mother, Tagore wrote a letter to his father asking him about the Russian invasion into India through the hills of Tibet. And he got a reply from this father saying that, don't worry, I would take care of it if that happens, and you guys are safe. But the experience of writing a letter and getting a reply opened up a complete, it opened Tagore's mind that this is something that he could do regularly, and then he would start writing letters. He obviously could not write, he didn't know the fundamentals of the beginning, end, and how to construct the letter writing. So he would take a help from the local munshi, who also after a while started getting irritated. So he gave him a crux of what to write, and Tagore would copy that and submit it to the munshi. He would do it on a daily basis. The munshi obviously was a little older, and therefore none of these would, or most of these would not reach the father, because they would not spend postage on all the letters. But this was an interesting experience for Tagore to write to his father and receive a reply. He also talks about some of the books that he had read of his father. His father obviously had a lot of books. He was a very well-read man, and the experiences that he felt of after reading the books. He also reminisces of a travel along with his father in his boat on the Ganges, and the houseboat had some very interesting books. And when Tagore read the books, his mind kind of opened up to some new things. So yeah, this is one of them, of course, is the Gayatri, and it's Gita Govinda. It's a book, and it obviously was written in Bengali. So Tagore was able to comprehend most of it. He might not be able to comprehend all of it, but he felt that in a way, not knowing some things it had its own romance, because you are filling the gaps with the richness of your imagination. And later in life, when he realized he had heard two verses of Kalidasa's poem, and the rest of it he had imagined in his head, and when he actually heard the verses later in life, he realized that they were not as vivid as how he had imagined. So in a way, he compares it to how we look back at our childhood, when there were so many things that we did not understand. We filled it up with what we felt was right, and that made it far more beautiful. So yeah, with that he ends this chapter, and with that I'm going to end this reading. I've taken a very long break, and I've come back after a very long time, and I intend to start recording these videos and complete this book. I hope you stay with me, and I will see you in the next video. Till then, goodbye, take care.